Chag Sameach, everybody. We're streaming now, FYI.
Chag Sameach.
And John says, yeah.
We had a most enjoyable evening last night with Rabbi Gruenberg and his family. It was wonderful.
Excuse me, it's 9:30.
Thank God, Rabbi Wexler, my father was on his best worst behavior, which
it was wonderful, Rabbi.
Dad is perfect for second Seder, just perfect, right?
Yep, he gives a little bit of life to yes.
It was wonderful.
Thank you, Linda. Or did Jerry give us the go?
Yes, he did.
Friends, Chag Sameach. We'll mute for the time being, and as we related to you, we're going to be doing a little bit of an alternate plan this morning with some of the normal highlights of the service, but also a little bit more engaging discussion and back and forth as well. But Cantor Herman comes forward. At this point, we are going to begin with the Baruch Hu on page 149 and page 340. Baruch Adonai Amvorach Leolam Avaed.
Baruch Adonai Amvorach Leolam Avaed. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Yotzer or uvorei choshech Ose shalom uvoreet hakol.
Continue bottom of 342. Hameir la'aretz.
Hameir la'aretz v'laradim alecha barachamim uftuvo mechadesh b'chol yom tamid maseh v'reishit. Ma rabu masech Adonai kulam b'chochma sita mala haaretz kinyanecha. El Baruch Gedol De'ahechin Uzaz Ochorechama Titbarach Adonai Eloheinu Ashavach Maseh Yadecha Ve'al Meor Reor She'asita Yefaruch Hasela Titbarach Tzureinu Malkeinu V'Goaleinu Borei Kedoshim Nishtabach Shemcha La'ad Malkeinu Yotzer B'Sharatim V'Asher B'Sharatim Kulam Omdim B'Rum Olam Kulam Achuvim Kulam Berurim Kulam Giborim V'Kulam Osim Be'ema Uviera Retzon Kovonam V'Kulam Bokim et Bihem B'Kedusha V'Tohora B'Shira V'Zimra Barachim Shabachim Farim Maritzim Magdishim Mamlechim Et Shem Ha'el HaMelech Hagadol HaGibor VeHanora Kadosh Hu V'Kulam Mekablim Aleihem Ol Malchut Shamayim Ze Mize V'Nonim Reshut Ze Laze Lehadish Ozam B'Nachad Uruach B'Safa V'Rura U'Vinima Kedosha Kulam Gechadonim V'Omerim B'Yira Kadosh 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 Adonai Tzivaot Meloch Ol Haaretz Kevodo והאופנים וחיות הקודש ברעש גדול מן הזמלום הצלפים לעומתם משבחים ואומרים ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקומו ליל ברוך נימות ייתנו למלך אל חי וקיים זמירות יאמר ותשבחו אור חדש על ציון תאיר, אור חדש על ציון תאיר, ונזכה כולנו מהרה לאורו, מהרה לאורו. ברוך אתה אדוני יוצר המאורות. אהבה רבה אהבתנו אדוני אלוהינו, חמלה גדולה ותרחמת עלינו. מלכנו בעבור אבותינו שבטחו בך, רבינו הרחמן. והאר עינינו בתורתך, ודבק ליבנו במצוותיך, ויחל לבבנו לאהבה וליראה את שמך, ולא נבוש לעולם ועד, ולא נבוש לעולם ועד, כי בשם קודשך הגדול והנורא בטחנו, נגילה ונשמחה, נגילה ונשמחה בישועתך. והביאנו לשלום מארבע כנפות הארץ, ותוליכנו קוממיות לארצנו, כי אל בו ישוס הטובנו בכל לשון, וקרבתנו לשמך הגדול סלע באמת, להודות לך ויחדך באהבה. ברוך אתה אדוני הבוחר בעמו ישראל באהבה. שמע ישראל אדוני אלוהינו אדוני אחד. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך. והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם, בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך, ובשוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם לאות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך. והיה אם שמוע תשמעו על מצוותי אשר אנוכי מצוותכם היום לאהבת אדוני אלוהיכם ולעובדו בכל לבבכם ובכל נפשכם, ונתתם את ארצכם בעיתו יראה מלכו ואספת דגניך ועשב לך ואכלת ושבעת ישם לכם פן יפתה לבבכם. אלוהים אחים מים בלוהים אתר והאדמה לא תיתן אתי בלבד מהארץ הטובה אשר אדוני נותן לכם, ושמתם את דברי אלה על לבבכם ועל נפשכם, ושרתם אותם לאות על ידכם ולעיניכם ולימדתם אותם בשבתך בביתך לך בדרך ושוך ובקומך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך, למען ירבו ימיכם וימי ימיכם על האדמה אשר נשבע אדוני לאבותיכם לתת להם כי מהשמיים על הארץ. ויאמר אדוני אל משה לאמור, דבר אל בני ישראל ואמרת עליהם, ועשו להם ציצית על כנפי בגדיהם לדורותם, ונתנו על ציצית הכנף בטיל תכלת, והיה לכם לציצית וראיתם אותו, וזכרתם את כל מצוות אדוני, ועשיתם אותם, ולא תטורו אחרי לבבכם ואחרי עיניכם, אשר אתם זונים אחריהם, למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם, אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם לאלוהים, אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אדוני אלוהיכם אמת, ויציב ונכון וקיים וישר ונאמן ואהוב וחביב ונחמד ונעים ונורא ואדיר ומתוקן ומקובל וטוב ויפה הדבר הזה עלינו לעולם ועד. אמס אלוהי עולם מלכנו צור יעקב מגן ישעינו לדור ודור, וכיום ושמו קיים בכיסו נכון, ומלכותו ואמונתו לעד קיימת. דבר וחיים וקיימים. על הראשונים ואמס חוק ולא יעבור. אמס שאתה הוא אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו מלכנו מלך אבותינו גואלנו גואל אבותינו יוצרנו צור ישועתנו פודנו מצילנו ואלם שמך אין אלוהים זולתך. עזרת אבותינו אתה הוא מעולם מגן ומושיע לבניהם אחריהם.
350 and 156.
אמס אתה הוא אדון לעמך ומלך גיבור להרים ריבם. אמס אתה הוא ראשון ואתה הוא אחרון, ומבעדך אין לנו מלך ולמושיע. ממצרים גאלתנו אדוני אלוהינו, ומבית עבדים פדיתנו, כל בכוריהם הרגת, ובכורך גאלת בים צוף בקעת, וזדים דיברת ובדים הם. תהילל אל עליון ברוך הוא מבורך, משה ובני ישראל הכנו שירה בשמחה רבה, ואמרו כולם מי כמוך באלים אדוני, מי כמוך נדר בקודש, נורא תהילות אוסף אלה. שיר החדש שיבחו גאולים לשמך על שפת הים, יחד כולם הודו והמליכו ואמרו אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. צור ישראל קומה בעזרת ישראל, ופני חינומך יחודה וישראל. גואלנו אדוני צבאות שמו, קדוש ישראל. ברוך אתה אדוני גאל ישראל.
We begin the Amidah aloud together, the Amidah for festivals, making all the necessary additions for Pesach 366 and 306.
ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו, אלוהי אברהם, אלוהי יצחק, אלוהי יעקב, אלוהי שרה, אלוהי רבקה, אלוהי רחל ואלוהי לאה, האל הגדול, הגיבור והנורא, אל עליון, גומל חסדים טובים וקונה הכל, וזוכר חסדי אבות, ומביגו אל לבני בניהם למען שמו באהבה מלך עוזר ופוקד ומושיע ומגן ברוך אתה אדוני מגן אברהם ופוקד שרה אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני מחיי מתים אתה רב להושיע מכלכל חיים בחסד, מחיי מתים ברחמים רבים, סומך נופלים ורופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר, מי כמוך בעל גבורות, ומדם מלך, מלך ממית ומחיה, ומצמיח ישוע ונאמן אתה לחיות מתים ברוך אתה אדוני מחיי המתים
נגדנו בעולם גרים מבקשים אותו בשמי מרום ככתוב ביד נביאך וקרא זה אל זה ויאמר
נקדש את שמך בעולם כשם שמקדישים אותו במרום ככתוב ביד נביאך וקרא זה אל זה ואמר
קדוש 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 אדוני צבאות מלך כל הארץ כבודו
קדוש 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 אדוני צבאות מלך כל הארץ כבודו אז בכל רעש גדול אדיר וחזק משמיעים קול מנסים לעומת צרפים לעומתם ברוך יאמרו
ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקומו
ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקומו ממקומך מלכנו תופיע ותמלוך עלינו כי מחכים אנחנו לך מתי תמלוך בציון קרוב בימינו לעולם ותשכון תתגדל ותגדל בשוכי ירושלים נראך לדור ודור ולנצח נצחים ועינינו תראינה מלכותך כדבר האמור בשירי עוזך על ידי דוד משיח צדקך.
ברוך אדוני לעולם אלוהי ציון לדור ודור הללויה.
ימלוך אדוני לעולם אלוהי ציון לדור ודור הללויה. לדור ודור נגיד גודלך לנצח נצחים קדושתך נקדיש ושבחך לא נביא לנו שלום ועד כי אל מלך גדול וקדוש אתה ברוך אתה אדוני האל הקדוש.
Friends, if you love Hallel, then the last 48 hours is definitely the time for you. We say it in the Seder twice, and we say the full Hallel the first 2 days of Pesach. So literally in less than a 48-hour period, you get to say the entirety of Hallel 4 times. So if you are not at a place after that where you feel like you have sung out to Hashem in just utter joy, I'm not sure there's a lot we can do for you at that point. We're going to have to figure out a new mode, is all I can say. Cantor Herman will lead us in Hallel, page 3. Cantor Herman will lead us in the festive Psalms of Hallel. Page 380, he recites the bracha, and then we follow after him.
ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם אשר קידשנו במצוותיו וציוונו לקרוא את ההלל.
אמן. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם אשר קידשנו מצוותיו וציוונו לקרוא את ההלל.
Amen. Hallelujah, 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 Avdei Adonai. Hallelujah, 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 et Shem Adonai. Yehi Shem Adonai mevorach, me'ata ve'ad olam. Yehi Shem Adonai mevorach, me'ata ve'ad olam. Mimizrach shemesh ad mevo, me'ulal Shem Adonai. Ram al kol goyim Adonai, al hashamayim kvodo, mikadonai Eloheinu, hamagbilah hashavet, hamashpili lirot, bashamayim uvaaretz, mikimi me'afardal me'ashpot yarim evyon. להושיבי עם נדיבים, עם נדיבי עמו, מושיבי עקרת הבית עם הבנים שמחה, הללויה. בצאת ישראל ממצרים, בית יעקב מהמלועז, הייתה יהודה לקודשו, ישראל ממשלותיו, הים רב הינוס, הירדן יסוב לאחור, הערים רקדו חיילים, גבעות כבני צאן. בצאת ישראל ממצרים, בית יעקב מהמלועז. מלך הים, קיטנוס, הירדן, תיסוב לאחור, ההרים, תרקדו חיילים, גבעות, כבני צאן, מלפני אדון, חולי ארץ, מלפני אלוה יעקב, ההופכי הצור, אגם מים, חלמיש, למיינו מים, לא לנו אדוני, לא לנו, כי לשמך תן כבוד על חסדך על עמיתך. למה יאמרו הגויים איה נא אלוהיהם, שמיים כל אשר חפץ עשה. ישראל בטח באדוני עזרם ומגינם הוא, בית אהרון בטחו באדוני עזרם ומגינם הוא. ירא אדוני בטחו באדוני עזרם ומגינם הוא. אדוני זכרנו יברך את בית ישראל, יברך את בית אהרון, יברך ירא אדוני הכתמים עם הגדולים. יוסף אדוני עליכם, עליכם ועל בניכם, ברוכים אתם לאדוני עושה שמיים בארץ. השמיים שמיים לאדוני, והארץ נתן לבני אדם. לא המתים יהללויה, ולא כל יורדי דומה, ואנחנו נברך יה מעתה ועד עולם, מעתה ועד עולם. הללויה. אהבתי כי ישמע אדוני את קולי תחנוני, כי אתה אוזנו לי ובימי אקרא.
384.
אתהלך לפני אדוני בארצות החיים, האמנתי כי אדבר, אני עניתי מאוד. אני אמרתי וחופזי, כל האדם כוזב. מה אשיב לאדוני כל תגמולו היא עלי, כוס ישועת עשה בשם אדוני אקרא. נדרי לאדוני אשלם נגדנה לכל עמוד. לך אזבח זבח תורה ובשם אדוני אקרא. נדרי לאדוני אשלם נגדנה לכל עמו. בחצרות בית אדוני בתוכך ירושלים. הללויה. הללו את אדוני כל גויים, שבחו כל האומים, כי גבר עלינו חסדו, ואמת אדוני לעולם. הללויה. A quick 30-second teaching on this melody and why I keep doing it over and over again, Adirhu, why I'm so in love with this particular melody for Pesach. There's a classification of melodies in Jewish musicology that they call Sinai tunes, which means from Sinai, which is tongue-in-cheek. We don't know what the music sounded like at Sinai, but we have certain melodies that are that we know existed across the entire spectrum of Ashkenazi Jewry, across the whole continent of Europe and Russia by the 1600s. And they were already in existence everywhere, so we know they're much, much older than that. And this is the Sinai melody, Adirhu, associated with Pesach. It's very, very old, older than we'll ever know, but it's older than the Middle Ages, much older, we know that. Hodu l'Adonai ki tov, ki leolam chasdo, yomarna Yisrael, ki leolam chasdo, yomruna veit Aharon, ki leolam chasdo, yomruna yirei Adonai, ki leolam chasdo. Mi מן המיצר קראתיה, ענני ומחביה. מן המיצר קראתיה, ענני ומחביה. ענני, ענני, ענני ומחביה. ענני, ענני, ענני ומחביה. אדוני אלוהי, מה יעשה לי אדם? אדוני בעוזרי ואני אראה שונאי. פתחו לי שערי צדק, אבובם הודיה. אוי פתחו לי שערי צדק, אבובם הודיה. זה אשר לאדוני צדיקים יבואו בו. זה אשר לאדוני צדיקים יבואו בו. עודך כי עניתני ותהי לי לישועה. עודך כי עניתני ותהי לי לישועה. אבן מסו הבונים הייתה לראש פינה. אבן מסו הבונים הייתה לראש פינה. מאת אדוני הייתה זאת כי נפלאת בעינינו. מאת אדוני הייתה זאת כי נפלאת בעינינו. זה היום עשה אדוני, נגילה ונשמחה בו. זה היום עשה אדוני, נגילה ונשמחה בו. Okay, Rabbi, let's try it. Let's just see what happens. Ana Adonai Hoshiana.
Ana Adonai Hoshiana.
Ana Adonai Hoshiana.
Ana Adonai Hoshiana.
Ana Adonai Hatzlichana.
Ana Adonai Hatzlichana.
Ana Adonai Hatzlichana.
Ana Adonai Hatzlichana.
Our hours of rehearsal on that really paid off. That was wonderful.
Really paid off.
Baruch haba b'shem Adonai, berachnuchem מבית Adonai. Baruch haba b'shem Adonai, berachnuchem מבית Adonai. El Adonai vaya'er lanu, איסור חג בבותים עד קרנות המזבח. El Adonai vaya'er lanu, איסור חג בבותים עד קרנות המזבח. אלי אתה ועודך אלוהי הרוממך. אלי אתה ועודך אלוהי הרוממך. הודו לאדוני כי טוב, כי לעולם חסדו. הודו לאדוני כי טוב, כי לעולם חסדו. May all creation praise you, Lord our God. יהללוך אדוני אלוהינו כל מעשיך, וחסידיך צדיקים עושי רצונך. כי לך טוב להודות ולשמך נאה לזמר, כי מעולם עד עולם אתה אל. ברוך אתה אדוני מלך מחולל בתשבחות.
Amen. We'll do a full Kaddish as a divide here, Cantor.
יתגלל ויקדש שמי רבה.
Amen.
ילמד יברך ירותי והמליך מלכותי בכל ויאמר בית ישראל בגלה וזמן קריב אמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מבורך לעולם ולעולמי עלמיא. יתברך וישתבח ויפאר וירומם וינשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי דקודשה.
Berichu.
בריחו לילה וגדול שירת הדוש ולחמת אמירן בעלמא ואמרו
Amen.
תתקבל צלות הון ובעת הון לכל ישראל קודם אבו הון דיבישמיא ואמרו
Amen.
יש למה רבה מן שמיא וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו
Amen.
עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ועל כל ישראל ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן.
Yashakoach Chazan for so beautifully leading us this morning in Shacharit and Hallow. We'll come back to you in a little while. Friends, one of the unique things about this year in terms of the calendar is that we do not have a Chol HaMoed Shabbat Pesach. We, as you know, because the Yontif days are on the weekends, there's no Chol HaMoed Shabbat Pesach. So traditionally, Chol HaMoed Shabbat Pesach is when we would read verses or the book of Shir HaShirim. And without that, we certainly have a little discretion as to where we can read Shir HaShirim. The truth is, reading Shir HaShirim is not something we are required to do. How do we know that? We don't say a bracha before we read Shir HaShirim. It's not something we're commanded to do. We know that reading the Megillot, Shir HaShirim, Kohelet, and Ruth on the pilgrimage festivals is a custom that we do to increase exposure of those books. Sometimes there's a clear connection between those books and the holiday they occupy. Other times the connection is less clear. The connection between Pesach and Shir HaShirim is certainly less clear. There is a notion in the book that it's occurring during springtime. And if you were to look in the Art Scroll translation / commentary to Shir HaShirim, they would make the case very strongly that just like Pesach is the time of redemption for God and the Jewish people, Shir HaShirim is the love song of that redemption. Modern biblical scholars would, shall we say, scoff at that notion that that's what it really is. But in any case, Shir HaShirim, even as we think about that connection and what it might be, Shir HaShirim certainly entertains some themes of the notion of divine love. And if we are connecting it for so many years to this love affair between God and the Jewish people, what does it truly mean to love God? And what do we expect in return for that love? So we're going to discuss that in a little bit more expansive way in a moment. But first, and Jeffrey has graciously put the link in the chat. I'm going to read the second chapter of Shir HaShirim. So Shir HaShirim occurs if you're just sitting with a Bible in front of you. It occurs in the last section of the Tanakh, immediately, ironically, following the book of Job. Perhaps they put it in that order because after you read the book of Job, you need a little bit of a pick-me-up, and what would be a better way than Shir HaShirim if you're right, reading the Bible in order. So chapter 2. Ani chavatzelet hasharon shoshanat ha'amakim kashoshana bein hachochim ken rayati bein habanot ketapuach be'atzei hayar ken dodi bein habanim betzilo chimadeti v'yashavti ufirio matok lechiki heviani el beit hayayin v'diglo alai ahava samchuni ba'ashishot rafduni batapuchim ki cholat ahava ani Smolo tachat roshi v'mino techabkeni Hishbati etchem benot Yerushalayim bitzvot O ba'ailot hasadeh im ta'iru v'im teoreru et ha'ava ad shetechpatz Kol dodi hine zeba medaleg al harim mekapetz al hagbaot dome dodi litzvi o la ofer ha'ayalim hine ze omed achar kotlenu mashgiach min hachalonot Meitzitz min hacharakim Anadodi ve'amar li Kumilach Rayati yafati Ulchilach Kine hastav avar Hageshem Chalaf halach lo Hanitzanim Nir'u va'aretz eit hazamir higia v'kol hator nishma be'artzenu hatena chanta pageha v'hagfanim smadar natnu reach kumilach rayati yafati ulchilach Yonati bechbag ve'asela beseter hamadrega harini et mar'ayich hashmi'ini et kolech ki kolech arev umar'ech naveh Echezulanu shualim talim mechablim kramim Uchramenu smadar Dodi li ve'ani lo Haroeh bashoshanim Ad shiafuach hayom Venasu hatzlalim So Demelecha dodi litzvi Oh Laofer hayalim al harevater. So as we traditionally do following the recitation of a passage from Megillah, we'll recite a mourner's Kaddish, and then we'll engage in some discussion about Shir HaShirim and the concept of divine love. So all mourners and those observing Yortzeit, please join me now in the recitation of mourner's Kaddish. Yitgadal ve'yitgadash shemei Rabbah.
Amen.
Be'alma divra kirutei ve'amlich malchutei. v'chayechon v'yomechon v'chayei dechol Beit Yisrael b'galau v'zman kariv v'imru amen.
Amen.
Yehi shmei rabba mevarach la'olam u'lamei maya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitbar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmei dekudsha b'richu.
Richu.
Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata. Tushbechata v'nechemata damiran be'alma v'imru amen.
Amen.
Yehesh lama rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen.
Amen.
Oseh shalom b'imroma v'uyaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru.
Amen.
Amen. I am going to take off the spotlight and ask you friends to put on gallery view. Did I get that right, Jeff? Wherever he is. Jeff's giving me the thumbs up. Good. So I'm going to have you put it on gallery view. And Jeffrey is also going to share in the chat a link to the texts that I'm going to be discussing with you today. There's no chance that we're going to get to all of the texts because I want to keep us in a somewhat normative timeline, but I don't want to screen share because then I can't see you, and I want to be able to see you. So my first question for you is the following. Every day that we daven, every time we come together, just a few minutes ago, we recite that first line of the Shema with great joy and great conviction. The first, I don't mean the Shema, excuse me, the first line of V'ahavta, sorry, of the first paragraph of the Shema. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. A line we have probably discussed ad nauseum. But what I would ask you today is, what does it mean to love God with all your heart, your soul, and your might? What does that mean? Feel free to raise your hand, to unmute, or to put it in the chat. But somebody's going to need to be our first volunteer to get the crowd warmed up this morning. What does it mean to love God? And as you're thinking about your answer, you can't ignore the idea of what love is in the human world, because that is our conception of God. So I don't want you to say, well, it's different than how we love people, because I'm pretty certain it's not supposed to be different, one. And two, what we're talking about at the end of the day is our conception of love. So whether it's our spouse, child, friend, parent, whatever it might be, what does it mean? How does it manifest itself to love God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might, right? I think if you think about it in this context, right, what does it mean to love a parent with all your soul and with all your might? I'm sure we could come up with examples for that, right? To care for a parent when they are later in life, where the child becomes the caregiver, right? That is such a manifestation of love for a parent. What does that look like for God? I'm going to stop introducing and call on Randy, please, and then Wendy Davis.
Well, we all know that word unconditional. And I think, you said that when you talked about just the moment about, caring for a parent when they're ill or at the end of their life, there is a feeling inside of you that it's hard to describe. And I think that's the same thing with the love for God. It's just so hard to describe. You just do it because it's part of you. It's just, I only hope my kids understand it, because there's nothing like taking care a parent at the end of their life.
Mm-hmm.
And that feeling is just unbelievable.
Yeah. Thank you, Randy. And let me offer you the following belief and hope. They see it. Believe me, I've seen it. I'm sure Rabbi Wexler would agree. We've seen it too many times in our career, how that value perpetuates itself in a really beautiful way. Wendy and then Pam.
I think a true love is something where there's a give and take. It's not all one-sided. And you need both sides for the love to really blossom and be true. And it's interesting because I'm always been fascinated with the paragraph that comes right before the Shema, where, and in fact, I was just looking at it today, and it's interesting we're talking about this now, about how God teaches us. And when he shows us the way things are, then we will respond to him. And that's almost like a parent. The parent teaches us, and then we respond to the parent.
Yeah. Thank you, Wendy. Pam.
So I actually never thought it would be the same. Like, we know our parents, we see our parents, we see our kids. It's definitely a real back and forth with that. We see our parents when they're sick. We're giving because they've given us so much. So when I've always thought, you're giving me a new perspective, because when I think of my love for God, it doesn't feel, or it hasn't been so much the same. It's more of a faith and a love that somebody's watching out for me and taking care of me, and that I fulfill the rules and the dreams that God has for us, or for me to live in the world. So I live my life in a way that I think God has proposed. So I certainly feel like I'm in certainly a relationship with God, and I feel like I love God and I have faith in God. But I never thought of it as the same as a human kind of love, because you can't see it, you can't measure it, you can't feel it the same, or you can't.
I completely understand what you're saying, Pam, and so I'm gonna, and then I see that Linda is raising her hand, and I'm gonna get to you in 1 second, but Pam, as you're saying this, and as a couple of people are saying it, it makes me think of the next source that I've shared with you, which is Jeremiah chapter 2, verse 2, right? Jeremiah is this sort of the prophet of doom. He's prophesizing during the destruction, but he has this beautiful line, right? Ko amar Adonai, thus said God, right? Hashem, Zacharti la chesed ne'uraich, ahavat kelulotaich, lechtech akarai bamidbar. Right? God says to them in this moment of destruction, I'm going to account the favor of the devotion of your youth, your love as a bride, how you followed me in the wilderness. And what I love about this verse is this notion that, our love for God will be returned. It's going to be, Pam, so different than our notion of a human relationship of love. And yet, our faith, our belief, our history still suggests that we can feel a measure of reciprocity in this loving relationship as we would in a human loving relationship, just the same. Linda, please. You're good.
Yeah, thank you. I always equate love with trust. And the trust, when broken in love, is something that if you can't get it back, you can't love. The trust, and I see love of God as something that will never be broken, because God is within you, just as a parent's love is within you always and forever.
I love that, Linda. Tested, maybe tested, right? Tested might be fair.
Well, yeah.
There are some, testing moments, not love, but patience, certainly. But, you get a week into a Passover stay, there's some patience that might be tested on occasion. But I love that, Linda. Thank you for sharing. Did I see another hand that I missed? I wanted to, Cantor Herman, please.
For me, it's very important to acknowledge some level of ridiculousness and seeming impossibility in the first source. You should love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and might too. I mean, I'm trying to think, have I loved anything with all my heart, soul, and might ever, or anyone? My experience of caring for an aging parent, it was harder and harder to feel love as it became more and more burdensome and difficult. And I was doing out of some sort of memory of love and obligation and appreciation, but I think as close as I could come to loving with all my heart, soul, and might, where I would lay down my life in an instant for this other person, would be at my children. And so to love something that you can't see and that we don't actually even know if it exists, but to love that unseen, unknown thing with all your heart, soul, and might seems like an impossible task. And I think for me to start there, to acknowledge that, allows me to begin to try to approach attempting this kind of love, which to me is a process.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for offering that alternate opinion. I think you're right. It's definitely a process. Wait, I think I missed Harriet. Were you raising your hand? Please.
Well, yeah, I think it's a concept that is so different for everyone to what is to love God. But I think it's a belief in a power greater than we are. And as religion is faith, you have faith in that power, that he guides your life.
Yeah, look. Love is a leap of faith on some level, the same way that religion or belief in God is. You ask a child to tell you how to prove to you that their parent loves them, and they'll talk about the hugs and the kisses and the, picking me up when I fall and cleaning my skinned knee. And we know on some level that that's certainly a manifestation of love. But a proof of love, I don't know that you get that, a proof of a feeling, of a notion. And I'm not sure, and I just think I appreciate about what the cantor said, I'm not even sure that's a realistic possibility. I want to share another verse with you, I had to bring it towards Shira Shirim. So a lot of people assume you choose the second chapter because of the famous Dodi Li. I actually did not choose it because of Dodi Li. I chose it because of this verse. This very bizarre verse. "O my dove in the cranny of the rocks, hidden by the cliff, let me see your face, let me hear your voice, for your voice is sweet and your face is comely." So as much as modern biblical scholars tend to be right, and when they tell you that the notion that this is a later edition, probably not King Solomon who wrote this in its entirety, but as I always read this verse, to me at least, what I think about is Friday afternoon at Camp Ramah, or Friday afternoon in the old city of Jerusalem as the sun is setting and you're seeing the last remnants of the sun, and you are literally craving Shabbat in that moment, in the perfect setting, in the perfect place, wherever it might be. And it's almost as though you can see Shabbat coming, but Shabbat keeps herself hidden. And the sounds of Kabbalat Shabbat, that's the sweet voice of Shabbat, and she's coming, she's on her way. And then as we get to the end of Lecha Dodi, that's that moment where Shabbat finally descends and the voice is sweet, and we know how beautiful Shabbat actually is. So for me, I love this verse. It's my second favorite verse from Shir HaShirim. You'll have to ask me another time what my favorite verse is. I'm just keeping it mysterious here, folks. But I absolutely love this verse because for me, it is an allusion to Shabbat. Ironically, for our sort of famous biblical commentator, Rashi, it is in no way an allusion to Shabbat. Thanks a lot, Rashi, for supporting me in this. Here's what Rashi says. This is said regarding the time when Pharaoh pursued them and overtook them, camping by the sea, with no place to escape in front of them because of the sea, and they could not turn aside because of the wild beasts. What did they resemble at that time? A dove that was fleeing from a hawk, and entered the clefts of the rocks where a snake was hissing at her. Should she enter inside? There was the snake. Should she go outside? There was the hawk. The Holy One, blessed be he, said to her, show me your countenance, the quality of your deeds, to whom you turn in time of distress. So for Rashi, this moment where they are just right at the sea and they are ready to sort of be destroyed, right? One place, the Egyptians coming, the sea really there. And that's when sort of the children of Israel showed their faith, led by Nachshon, right? And showed their faces to God. And that's when God reacted to them. So look, am I suggesting to you that I think that's necessarily the piece of the verse and that's immediately why we connect to Pesach? No, not necessarily, but I do think there is something incredible in this notion that's supported both by the book of Jeremiah and by this idea from the book of Shir HaShirim that we're not talking just solely about our devotion, about God's devotion to us, but that God actually historically reacts to those moments where we've been devoted to God. So I'm going to share one more text with you, and there's a bunch more on the sheet, and I certainly invite you to take a look at them. But I want to share this last one from Maimonides. And what is the proper love? You shall love the Lord with an exceeding great and strong love, that his soul be tied to the love of the Lord, finding himself in constant tremor, as if he were suffering of love sickness. When his mind is free because of a love for a woman, being continuously agitated about her, whether he is sitting down, standing up, even when he is eating or drinking. Basically, you go back to your high school days. Sorry, I lost my place. More than this, the love of the Lord be in the heart of those who love him, meditating therein constantly, as commanded us with all my soul and my heart. That is what Solomon allegorically said, for I am love sick. And the whole book, Song of Songs, is an allegory on this subject. So, first of all, Maimonides kind of sets it up for us, the importance of this and why it would be so important for us to read it, even though it's likely to be a apologetic after it made it to part of the canon, and after the fact they wanted to make sure that there was a justifiable reason. But just in conclusion, the reason I do like this verse and the verse from Jeremiah and this notion of divine love that we've talked about this morning is kind of, as you alluded to, Pam, and a few other people, we think very differently about the love of God and the love of human beings, right? Of course, we would have to. The love of human beings, they're in front of us. And even though it may not be provable, a hug, a kiss, taking care of somebody, there are gestures in this world that are manifestations of that. And I don't know about for everybody, but I think, and Cantor Herman alluded to this, that sometimes the hard thing for us is to be able to feel that, internalize that in a way, right, that is comfortable to us in a human way when we don't get those same manifestations. And yet, I love these texts because it supports the idea and the notion that God responds to those manifestations, that God sees those manifestations in some way. And it lets me kind of feel the comfort and the safety of that reciprocal loving relationship. So, friends, Chag Sameach. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Rabbi Wexler.
So I must have learned an entirely different book of Shir Hashirim in rabbinical school than you did. We had to spend a semester on it in Israel. Did you guys do that too with Buzzy Porton?
No.
So we all had to spend a semester on Shir Hashirim, on the Song of Songs, the year we were in Israel. But the Song of Songs Buzzy Porton taught us was much more 50 Shades of Gray than 50 Shades of Prey, like you taught it this morning. It was an unusual class. He had us writing poetry in the image of Song of Songs, and the way that the book of Song of Songs, that the lovers describe each other either from head to toe or toe to head using a different metaphor. He would have each of us choose a metaphor and write our own poetry, and then of course have to read it aloud to each other and then criticize. Englander, do you think your girlfriend wants you to be compared to a horse?
By the way, so I had to pick the year that he was on sabbatical.
Oh, wow. I think of that every time we come to it on Pesach. So I appreciated the trip down memory lane today. This morning, the Torah reading, I'm going to turn us to the Torah reading for the second day of Pesach. And actually the second day of most festivals, it is the calendar. The exact same reading. One of my Bima partners, I don't remember which one. I guess this is the festival for talking about my Bima partners. This one I don't remember who said it. But because they were all used to say that the choice of redundant Torah reading for the second day was proof positive that even the rabbis thought that the second day of Yontif was extraneous. They were so bored, he said, by the second day of Yontif that they didn't even want to bother to come up with a unique reading. It was a fairly compelling argument. Not that we ever did anything to act upon it, as you know. There have been other conservative synagogues in Baltimore that have tried to do away with the second day of Yontif. It's interesting how it takes hold, even among those who think that it's extraneous, including the rabbis who assigned the Torah reading as the same Torah reading, that litany of the holidays, recording one after the other how they were to be observed biblically. And frankly, that was one of the reasons that at Chizuk, we often use the second day as an opportunity to teach something entirely unrelated to the Torah portion, as Rabbi Gruenberg just did. And I was prepared to do that again today until my most clever, creative, and innovative friend and colleague, Rabbi Seltzer, pointed something out to me. He said, this is the year to talk about the Torah reading. He said, this is the year to talk about the festive calendar, because this year, the Jewish calendar was transformed. He posed a question to me. How did we innovate all of the Jewish holidays this year? Manish Chana Hashana Hazot Mikol Hashanim. How is this year different from all other years? In all other years, we rely on the Jewish calendar to unite us, to bring the community together. But this year, we observed the calendar alone for the most part. You have often heard me say, if you haven't yet, you will now, You've often heard me say that there are two cycles in the life of every Jew. The life cycle, which we all experience, but we go through it separately at different times and different places. We celebrate birth, we celebrate death, we celebrate marriages and milestones, but we do it at our own pace, each to its own family. The second cycle in the life of every Jew is the festival cycle, which we go through together at the same exact time. And each of us is constantly somewhere on either of these two cycles, living our lives in the midst of living the life of the Jewish people. This year, however, our cycles were off, and we had to reimagine the calendar in new ways. We could not rely on the familiar sounds and smells and experiences. We have been doing our calendar the same way for thousands of years until this last year, when we had to create new ways to experience the holidays. When the Torah reading for the second day of Pesach and the second day of the festivals instructs us on how to observe and how to experience, that was something that we couldn't do this year. For Shavuot, we staying up and learning in groups at Shul was reimagined as an all-night Tikkun Leil Shavuot over Zoom. Dozens of synagogues and Jewish institutions in Baltimore came together online to study from 8 in the evening until 5 in the morning, when an early shacharit was offered to greet the giving of the Torah. Torah was taught across the Jewish spectrum without cost or barrier, which served as a fitting corrective for the period of the Omer, when a lack of understanding and love between Jews led to death and destruction. This summer, Tisha B'Av brought people who had never observed this day to Chizuk Amuno online to hear the sad, mournful music and listen to lamentations chanted from living room floors and back decks. It was hard to imagine Rosh Hashanah without the trappings of a traditional Chizuk Amuno high holidays, a traditional sanctuary high holidays, a holiday that is not very much observed at home, but instead rooted in the physical space of the synagogue. And yet here, we conceived ways to capture the traditional experiences of the high holidays as set out in the Torah reading. Greeting one another in person became a drive-through machzor pickup at Shul, complete with honey sticks, white kippot, and instructions on how to participate in services through the television screen in your own home. I'm watching Ann Young do that right now while I preach. Tashlich was observed as a series of small neighborhood gatherings at bodies of water throughout Baltimore, where we cast our sins upon the waters and then heard shofar blown. The mitzvah of hearing shofar in person happened on a grand scale in the parking lot on Rosh Hashanah afternoon from the ladder of a fire truck in 7 other locations. For Yom Kippur, the themes of the holiday were explored through choral music and visual imagery through home participation from every age group. Sukkot brought new challenges, so we built multiple Sukkot on our property and had families sign up to have a meal with their own households in a sukkah to shake the lulav and etrog and make the blessings. We did hakafot outside on the field on a beautiful fall morning with some of you. And we delighted in taking virtual tours of our members' Sukkot as they worshiped in them from home. Every minyan, Jeffrey Platt, would try to be outside in his sukkah as he joined onto minyan. Hanukkah was always a home-based festival, but even that we shared in new ways. Cantor Herman let us sing along from his piano at home. We made requests, he sang, we sang along, and the lights burned brighter. We dropped off gifts on doorsteps and threw chocolate gelt at the screen during Meital Asher's Zoom bat mitzvah. Purim meant that we had come full circle on our Jewish festival cycle. Back where we started, the week, the world, and Judaism with it changed. We held a Purim carnival from our cars. Horns were honked at Haman's name instead of Grogger's. We got all dressed up, even with no place to go. Our community made dozens and dozens of Mishloach Manot packages to thank our first responders and deliver them safely to hospitals and firehouses. We remembered our honored elders at Purim with special packages left at assisted living. And now we find ourselves at our second pandemic Passover, when we found a new way to tell the story to our children and grandchildren. The virtual feast of the firstborn was BYOB, bring your own bagel. After thousands of years of celebrating Seder in a certain way, we created Zoom starim, and families from across countries and time zones were able to celebrate together, some for the very first time. Elijah got his own box on Zoom, and people printed out pictures of shank bones if they were afraid or unable to shop. At last night's Zoom Seder, my middle brother Stu led the Seder, and he asked a couple of questions related to this year's calendar. He asked all the children and adults to share something that they were looking forward to when COVID was coming to its end. And we also asked people to share something that they wouldn't miss. Something like not having to wear waistbands that weren't elastic, not having to get kisses from strangers when they didn't want it. There were a lot of children there. We realized that there were, of course, gifts that we were able to be together in the Zoom Sedarim, and how extraordinary it was that our calendar had been recreated. While there was so much of the Jewish festival cycle, as recounted in the Torah reading, that we missed being able to do together, there were also so many new interpretations for which we were and we are incredibly grateful. Over this past year, while we could not rely on the familiar sounds, smells, sights, and experiences of the festival cycle, the calendar remained decidedly the same familiar rhythm. In years to come, when the community recalls how we observed this past year and how we lived our Jewish lives, there is a book yet to be written about the Jewish calendar, about the Jewish festivals as recorded in the Torah, and the Jewish festivals as recorded in the year 2020 and 2021. The past year has brought more innovation to the Jewish calendar of observances than perhaps hundreds
It appears as if Rabbi Wexler's feet has temporarily
or thousands of years. Let the old be renewed and the new be sanctified. We have renewed and sanctified our COVID festivals and brought meaning and newness to our old vessels. Chag Sameach. Sorry about that. Thought I had fixed the connectivity issues. I see that some things like matzah crumbs stick around indefinitely. Jeffrey's helping me work it out, which I know we will do. We're going to turn to the conclusion of our services. In the days and weeks to come, I would love to hear about how your festival observances had changed. Once Rabbi Seltzer and I started talking about the calendar and what we might write, I was curious to hear how others might reinterpret that. Here we go. We've been delighted to gather with you this Yontif morning to celebrate, to learn, to study, and to sing. And we're going to close in just a moment with song again. For me, that's one of the things that I'm most looking forward to at the end of COVID, which is singing with all of you together. It's not much fun to sing in my own home by myself, as much as my children enjoy that. But God willing, soon, and hopefully next week, if you're going to join me and you've signed up outdoors for the 8th day, we will sing together outside. For now, as a synagogue family, we offer our comfort to those who are grieving the Shabbat and honor the memories and yortzites of all of our loved ones for whom we say Kaddish this Yontif. The following are recorded in our congregation's Perpetual Memorials for today, the 16th of Nisan. Irving Barmack, Charles Cohen, Bernard Danker, Abraham Feynman, Hilda Paris Gamble, Nathan Harris, Ruth Michelson, Jerome Sidney Nyman, Lottie Newberger, Mildred Nachamowitz, and Abraham F. Rothfeder. Mourners and Yortzeit Kaddish, page 512. Yid Kadzal v'Yid Kadash Shemei Rabbah, Be'alma Tivra Chirutei v'Yamlich Malchutei, B'chayei v'Yomei U'B'chayei D'chol Beit Yisrael, Ba'agala U'Bizman Kariv v'Yimru, Amen.
Amen. Yehei Shmei Rabba Mivorach Leolam Olomei Almaya.
Yitbarach v'Yishtabach v'Yitpa'ar v'Yitromam v'Yitnaseh v'Yitzadar v'Yitzaleh v'Yitzhalal Shemei Dekudesha
Brichu.
Le'elah min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechamata da'amiran be'alma v'Yimru Amen.
Amen.
Yehei Shlama Rabba min Shemaya v'Chaim Aleinu v'Al Kol Yisrael v'Yimru Amen.
Amen.
Oseh Shalom b'Mromav Hu Yaseh Shalom Aleinu v'Al Kol Yisrael v'Yimru Amen. Yehi Zichram Baruch. We pray that each of their memories endure as a blessing. Yontif tonight concludes with Mincha Mariv and Havdalah. Mincha at 7:30 p.m., Havdalah at 7:55 p.m. Please remember to count the Omer this evening. I don't know about you, but the hardest days for me to remember are those first couple after we start counting before I'm really in a routine. Rabbi Gruenberg shaking his head to me. You're still on track though, right? You did it last night, so you're good.
I did it last night, but I think my record is probably like 17. I'm terrible at it. It's just one of those areas that will always be my rabbinic Achilles heel, making it through the Omer.
Gary Rosenblatt, who I think he used to edit the Baltimore Jewish Times, but more recently he edited the New York Jewish Week for many, many years. His father was the rabbi in Annapolis. And I think he went to, I don't know, one of the Frummy places here in Baltimore. But there was a year when he was a kid, it must have been TA or something, that TA offered them Orioles tickets if they didn't miss the night counting the Omer. And he was a huge baseball fan. And he wrote about how exciting it was to have counted the Omer every night and then to be able to go to the Orioles with his Rebbe's.
Unfortunately, not because of COVID, but because of the Orioles, that might no longer be a significant incentive.
What kind of fair weather fan are you?
No, I'm a new Orioles fan. Just a realistic one for this year, at least.
Stu, my brother Stu, he had left gifts with a box. You weren't allowed to open the box until we got to the beginning of the Seder. He said it was something new, a sign of spring to add to the Seder plate. And when you opened it, it was a baseball. Clever, right? So they put a baseball on the Seder plate. All right, enough kibitzing. You probably have naps to get to. Cantor, let's finish off with something peppy for Adon Olam.
Here we go. אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא לעת נשא וחפצו כל אזי מלך שמו נקרא אדון עולם. אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא לעת נשא וחפצו כל אזי מלך שמו נקרא ואחרי ככלות הכל לבדו ימלוך נורא והוא היה והוא הווה והוא יהיה בתפארה אדון עולם. אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא לעת נשא וחפצו כל אזי מלך שמו נקרא והוא אחד ואין שני להמשיל לו להכבירה בלי ראשית בלי תכלית ולא העוז והמשרה אדון עולם. אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא לעת נשא וחפצו כל אזי מלך שמו נקרא והוא אלי וחי גואלי וצור חבלי בעת צרה והוא ניסי ומנוס לי מנת כוסי ביום אקרא אדון עולם. אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא לעת נשא וחפצו כל אזי מלך שמו נקרא בידו אף כי רוחי בעת תישן ואירה ואם רוחי גבייתי אדוני לי ולא אירה אדון עולם. אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא לעת נשא וחפצו כל אזי מלך שמו נקרא. חג שמח.
חג שמח.
Chag Sameach. Am I the only one who remembered Kiddush again? Yes. Okay.
Chag
Vayisher
Sameach.
Moshe Moed Adonai el bnei Yisrael savri baruch
Chaim.
Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagam.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamotzi lacha min haaretz.
Amen.
There's always that moment.
Be well, be safe.
It's going to be challah and then it's matzah.
Chag Sameach.
Chag
Sameach, יישר כוח, Rabbi Greenberg, Rabbi Wexler.
Chag Sameach. Baruch Hashem.
Benny Baker, wonderful to see you.
Good to see everybody.
Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach.
Hi, Stephanie.
Moshe.